good evening, or good night, more likely, for if you have found your way here at all, then you have almost certainly come the way that everyone comes to this quiet place, at the soft-worn end of a long day, with the lamps turned low and the house gone still, and the whole wide world loosening its hold on you at last. Wherever you are tonight, however you have settled yourself just now, you can begin very gently to let go of it all. There is nothing further the day requires of you, nothing to finish, nothing to answer, nothing at all that cannot wait, patient and untroubled until the morning. You have come to the one quiet hour that belongs entirely to rest, and you are allowed to sink all the way down into it, slowly and softly, and without the least hurry anywhere in the world. So let the day be over now. Let it be truly over. It asked a great deal of you, perhaps, and you gave it what you had, and now the giving is done, and there is nothing left in all the world but to be still, and to breathe, and to let yourself be carried gently down towards sleep. So take a slow breath in if you like, and let it go even more slowly than it came, and feel, as you do, the whole weight of your body settling down at last into whatever holds it, the mattress soft beneath you, the pillow cool under your head, the covers drawn up warm across your shoulders. Let those shoulders come down now, down from wherever the long day has carried them. Let the small muscles around your eyes grow loose and unneeded. Let your jaw soften, and your hands lie open and easy, and your breath find its own slow depth without your minding it at all. There is nothing more for you to carry tonight, and nothing more for you to hold, and no part of you that must stay awake and watchful any longer. The day is done. The only thing left in all the world is to lie here, warm and heavy and safe, and to listen, and to let a quiet voice carry you somewhere very far away and very long ago, while you drift down, by soft warm degrees, towards sleep. For that is all this is, truly a gentle voice, and a long slow story, and a warm dark place for your mind to wander in until it grows too heavy and too content to wander any further. You do not need to remember a word of it. You do not need to hold the thread from one end of the night to the other, or follow where it goes, or keep any of it at all. If sleep should come and gather you up long before the story is done, then you will have done the one right and perfect thing, and the story will still be here, patient and unhurried, whenever you should care to come back to it. There is no test at the end. There is nothing you must keep. There is nothing tonight to solve, and nothing to work out, and nowhere at all that you need to get to. There is only rest, and the slow unspooling of a tale meant for no purpose in all the world but to ease you softly down into sleep, and to keep you gentle company while you go. And if your thoughts are still turning, if some corner of the day is still going quietly round and round somewhere at the back of your mind, replaying what was said, or reaching on ahead toward the small cares of tomorrow, then that is all right too, and you need not fight it at all. You do not have to push those thoughts away, or scold them, or hurry them out of the room. You can simply let them be, the way you might let a little wind outside the window simply be, there, but no longer asking anything of you, no longer needing your reply. Let them drift toward the edges of things. Let them settle and go quiet on their own, the way the water goes quiet in a sheltered bay when the evening wind lies down at last. There is nowhere you must be tonight, and nothing you must solve, and so little by little your mind can loosen its grip on the day, and let the whole of it float gently away, out through the window and off into the dark, until only the warmth is left, and the voice, and the slow sweet sinking towards sleep. Tonight we are going to go and visit some people, and they are, I think, among the bravest and the gentlest and the most quietly astonishing people we have ever gone to visit together, though the world has largely forgotten them, and though they left us no name to call them by, and no picture of their faces, and not one single word in their own tongue. We are going to go back a very long way tonight, 60,000 years and more into the deep past, further back than almost anything our kind remembers, to a warm green coast at the eastern edge of the old world, and we are going to sit down among the first people who ever looked out across an open sea, and thought about the far side of it, and found a way to go. They were the first seafarers. They were the first of all our long family ever to leave the solid earth behind on purpose, and trust themselves to water they could not stand up in, and paddle away from everything they knew toward a land they could not even properly see. And what they found, in the end, when the water at last gave way again to sand beneath their feet, was a whole new continent, a vast warm country at the bottom of the world where no human foot had ever fallen, and no fire had ever burned, and not one person had ever stood in all the ages of the earth before them. And here is the thing I would most like you to carry down into sleep tonight, and it is a warm thing, and a kind one, that these were not heroes out of a tale, and not restless conquerors, and not lone bold adventurers setting out to make a name. They were families. They were mothers and fathers and grandmothers, with children to carry and old ones to help along, with fires to keep and food to find and stories to tell in the dark, ordinary, tender, deeply human people who had lived by that warm sea all their lives and knew it the way you know your own street. They did not set out to do something grand. Nobody stood upon that beach and declared that they would go and discover a continent, for they did not know that continents existed, or that the world had any shape at all beyond the shape they could see. They were only living, one ordinary day at a time, one tide and one fishing, and one good season at a time, as you have lived your days. And in the living of them, patiently, over more lifetimes than any one of them could count, they became the first mariners in the history of the world, and carried our whole family across an ocean and into a land that had waited empty since the beginning of everything. So let your breath go slow, and let the warm room hold you, and let the whole busy modern world go quiet and far away. We are going back now, back past every city and every road, back beyond every farm and every written word, past the pyramids and past the first villages, and past even the last great age of ice, into a deep green warmth at the far eastern rim of the old world, where the land ends and the water begins, and the sun goes down into a sea that no one has ever crossed. Picture along shore in the evening, in the golden hour, the palms leaning out over the sand, the reef breaking white a little way out, the tide sighing in and sighing out as it has sighed since the world began, and a thin blue thread of wood smoke rising from a small camp above the tide line, where a few families are settling in for the night at the edge of all the world they know. Let us begin there, softly on that warm and ordinary beach, and go on gently from there, the way those first people went, one easy unhurried step at a time, out toward the water and the horizon and the long slow story of how our kind first learned to cross the sea. So let us stand a while, first upon that warm eastern shore, and take our time with it, for it is a lovely country and there is no reason at all to hurry through it. Picture the land behind the beach, a green and generous world, thick and soft and dripping, running back from the sand into forest and hill and river valley, a tropical country of the old world, warm all the year through, where the rain came in its season and the fruit came in its season, and the living, for a people who understood it, was as good and as gentle as living has ever been for our kind. There was no ice here and no winter, and no long hungry dark to be survived, the cold great glaciers lay half a world away to the north, and their only gift to this warm country was the strangest and most useful gift imaginable, which we shall come to in a little while. Here there were only the palms and the great trees and the tangled green, the rivers running clear and brown to the sea, the birds calling all day in the canopy, and the sun going over warm and slow and dependable, day after day after day, for more generations than anyone could hold in mind. This was the far eastern edge of the inhabited world, the end of the long road that had carried our family out of Africa and across the whole width of Asia, and here, at last, on this warm shore, the walking stopped, because the land did. And feel how the people lived along that shore, for they had made themselves entirely at home in it, easily, as a matter of course, the way you have made yourself master of the small warm arts of your own house. They knew the forest behind them, every fruiting tree in its season, every root worth the digging, every good stone, and every good wood, and every vine strong enough to bind with. They knew the rivers, and the fish in them, and the shellfish in the mud of the estuaries. But most of all, and best of all, they knew the shore itself, that long bright ribbon where the land and the water meet, which is the richest and most generous country our kind has ever found. Picture the reef at low tide, laid bare and glistening in the sun, the pools full of small trapped fish, the shellfish clustered thick on every rock, the crabs sidling in the wet sand, the seaweed and the urchins and the whole endless patient bounty of it, replenished twice a day, forever, by a sea that never tired of giving. The people who knew that shore could not easily go hungry. They lived along it in their small close bands, and moved gently up and down it with the seasons, and ate well, and raised their children in the warm shallows, and wanted for very little in all the world. And feel what the sea was to them in those first long ages, for this is the heart of where our story begins, and it is worth our sitting with it gently. The sea was not, at first, a road. It was not a way to anywhere. It was the edge of things, the great blue wall at the end of the world, the place where the land simply stopped and something else began. They loved it, surely, and they lived off it, and they knew its near edge as intimately as they knew their own hands, the shallows and the reef and the wading depth, the water they could stand up in, the water that gave them their supper. But out beyond the reef the water changed colour, and went from green to a deep and endless blue, and there the knowing stopped. That was not their country. That was the outside of everything. And every evening the sun went down into it, and every night the stars came up out of it, and for a very long time it did not occur to anyone at all, why should it, that a person might have any business out there whatsoever. The sea was the world's rim, and their world ended at it, and that was simply how things were, and had always been, and might have gone on being forever. But here is the gentle marvel that changes everything, and it is a lovely thing to drift upon, so let us take it slowly. Far away to the north, in that same deep age, the great glaciers of the world were growing, piling up mile upon mile, age upon age, holding an unimaginable weight of the world's water locked away white and frozen at the top and the bottom of the earth. And because that water was up there, it was not down here, and so the seas of the whole world drew back. They sank and shrank away from the land, and fell far below where they stand today, and all around the warm eastern edge of the old world, where the seafloor slopes away long and shallow and gentle. The water withdrew for hundreds of miles, and the land came up dry into the light. A whole great country appeared, where now there is only water, a vast low shelf of forest and river and plain, joining islands that we now think of as separate into one enormous warm green land, running out to the east from the foot of Asia. We might give that lost country a name now, and call it the Shelf, or the drowned land, or the country beneath the waves. But to the people who lived on it, it had no name and needed none. It was simply the world, more good green country, more rivers and forest and shore, rolling on toward the sunrise, exactly as it always had. And so gently, over ages, the people walked out along it. Not as a journey, never as a journey, only as living, a good river valley found and settled and lived in for a lifetime. The children grown and drifting a little further east to a shore their parents never saw. Their children on again, a little further still, following the good fishing and the good fruiting and the easy warmth. And in that slow way, without a single soul ever meaning it, our family walked all the way out to the very furthest eastern edge of the walkable world, out to where that great drowned country ended at last, and the shelf fell away, and the water went suddenly, shockingly deep and blue, and there was no more land at all to walk upon. They had come, without knowing it, to the true end of the old world. Behind them lay everything, every place their people had ever been, all the long road back through Asia to the African dawn, every fire their family had ever lit. And ahead of them lay water, and that, it seemed, was that. And feel the deep quiet of that moment in our family's story, which was not a moment at all, but an age, spread across more lifetimes than anyone could number. For here is a thing worth resting in. Our kind stopped there. We are so used to thinking of ourselves as restless, as the animal that always goes on, that it is a wonder and a comfort to remember how long we simply stayed, how many thousands of years the people lived along that furthest eastern shore, happy and well-fed and utterly at home, with the deep water lying out there beyond the reef every single day of their lives, and no notion in the world of going out on it. Generation upon generation was born on that shore, and grew up on it, and loved on it, and raised its children, and honoured its old ones, and laid its dead gently to rest on it, and never once crossed. It was not failure, and it was not fear exactly. It was simply that the world was already good, and already whole, and already enough, and the water was the edge of it, and there was no reason under the warm sun to think otherwise. That is where our story truly begins, not with a bold idea, but with a long contented staying. And so picture them there, the shore people, at their camp at the eastern edge of everything, on an ordinary evening at the close of an ordinary day. The fire is lit above the tide line where the sand is dry. The day's gathering is in, the shellfish in their heaps, the fish on the coals, the fruit brought down from the forest behind. The children are still in the shallows in the last of the light, shrieking and splashing, as children in shallow warm water have done in every age of the world. The old ones sit where the sand is softest and watch them. The tide comes in, and sighs, and goes out again. And out past the reef the deep blue water runs away to the flat far rim of the sky, empty, enormous, unregarded, the edge of the world, the outside of everything, a thing so permanent and so ordinary that nobody so much as looks at it twice. There they are then, our family, at the end of the land, with the whole unguessed ocean lying out beyond their firelight, and no idea at all that anything lies past it. Let your breath go slow, and let the tide sigh in and out, and let us stay a while longer with these people now, softly, and learn how a family that lives at the water's edge slowly, gently, over ages, becomes a family of the water. So let us sit down among them for a while, gently, and watch how the sea got into their lives, for the crossing did not begin with a raft, or with a plan, or with anyone looking out at the horizon and wondering. It began with something far softer and far more ordinary than that. It began with a people getting wet every single day. Picture a child of that shore, born in the warmth above the tide line. She can hear the sea from the moment she is born. That endless, soft breathing of the surf, day and night, the first sound she ever knows. She is carried down to the shallows before she can walk. She is dipped and washed and floated in the warm green water by hands that have done it 1,000 times. She learns the feel of the water holding her up before she learns to run, and by the time she is old enough to be of any use at all, she has spent more hours in the sea than out of it, wading, ducking, hunting crabs in the pools. Learning without one word of teaching that water is not a wall but a place, a country with its own rules which a person may live in and move through and be perfectly at ease. And feel how much they knew of it, these shore people, and how deep that knowing went, for it was not the knowing of a swimmer, but the knowing of a people. They knew the tide, of course, they knew it the way you know the hour, without thinking, without ever consulting anything, simply because it was in them. They knew that the water would draw back and lay the reef bare, and roughly when and how far, and what the moon had to do with it. They knew the days when the tide went out further than usual and gave up its greatest treasures, and the days when it barely went at all. They knew where the current ran along the shore and where it turned, where a person could wade and where a person had better not, which channel filled fast and which slow. They knew the water's colours and what each of them meant, the pale green over sand, the dark over weed, the brown of a river's mouth after rain, the sudden hard blue where the bottom fell away. All of this they held without effort, the way you hold the rooms of your own home in the dark. The sea's near edge was not wilderness to them, it was home ground, mapped and known and utterly familiar, right out to the line where the reef broke white. And they were, before they were ever sailors, the most patient and knowing of fishermen, and there is a great calm in the picture of it. Picture a man standing motionless to his thighs in the clear shallows in the first grey light, spear poised, waiting, as still as the post of a jetty, while the little fish come back around him and forget that he is there. Picture the women working along the reef at the low tide with their bags and their digging sticks, gathering the shellfish, prizing the limpets, feeling under the ledges for whatever hides there, talking all the while, calling to one another across the pools. Picture the weirs and the traps, the low walls of stone piled patiently across a tidal flat, so cleverly set that the water flows in over them at the high tide and drains away at the low and leaves the fish behind, a thing built once and giving food forever after. The gentlest and most companionable way of fishing that our kind has ever devised. All of this is done at the water's edge, in the shallows, within the depth a person can stand in, and all of it, without anybody ever intending it, is a long, slow education in the sea. And feel the first floating, for this is where it truly begins, and it is such a small and homely thing that you could pass it by entirely. Long before anyone ever thought of an ocean, people had rivers to deal with, and lagoons, and swamps, and the wide brown mouths of estuaries, and there is nothing in the world more natural for a person standing on a river bank looking at the far side than to notice that wood floats. A fallen log comes down the flood and turns slowly in the current, and someone watches it. A child clings to a piece of driftwood in the shallows and is carried a little way and laughs. A person needing to get across a channel with dry hands takes hold of a log and kicks. None of this is invention, it is not even an idea, it is simply what any clever animal by a river would do. But it is the seed of everything. For from a log you may get to 2 logs, and from 2 logs lashed together with a vine you may get to something you can lie upon, and from something you can lie upon you may get, in time, to something you can sit upon and carry things upon and take a child upon, and by then though nobody has noticed, our family has begun to build boats. And feel how long that took and how gently it went, for this is the part that our impatient age gets most wrong about them. There was no moment of invention. Nobody had a flash of brilliance on a beach. It went the way that all the deep old skills of our family have gone, a very little at a time, over a very long time, each generation making the small ordinary improvement that its own life happened to ask for, and handing the whole of it on to its children without ever once thinking that anything remarkable was happening. Someone lashed the logs a little tighter, because the last one came apart. Someone found that a certain wood floated higher and lasted longer, and told her daughter. Someone discovered that a flat blade of wood pushed against the water moved you along much better than a hand did, and everyone up and down the shore had one within a lifetime. Someone learned that the thing rode better if it was longer than it was wide, and someone else that it steered better if you sat back rather than forward. 100 small knowings, none of them worth remarking on, each one handed quietly down the generations like a family recipe, and out of all of them, at the end of a very long time, comes a craft that can carry a family across open water. That is how our kind has always done its greatest things, not in a moment, but in 10,000 ordinary days. And feel what the water gave them once they were upon it, for the reward came quickly, and the going further followed the reward, always, all the way to the end of the story. A person who can float can fish, where a person who wades cannot. Out past the reef, in the deeper blue, there are bigger fish, and more of them, and once you can get out there and back, your family eats better than it did, so you go out a little further, because it is worth it. And the day you can go out far enough that the shore is small behind you, you are, though you would never say so, a sailor. We know that they got out there too, and this is one of the loveliest hard facts in the whole of this story. So let it rest gently in your mind as you sink. In the caves of those eastern islands, the archaeologists have dug up the leavings of ancient dinners, tens of thousands of years old, and among the bones of the fish those people ate are the bones of tuna. Tuna, deep, fast, open water fish that live far out where the bottom drops away into the dark, and that no one has ever caught by wading. Someone was out there, that far back, in something, catching them. The evidence of the boats is gone forever, but the evidence of the fish remains, and the fish could not lie. And so picture the shore of that furthest eastern land now, as the ages turned and the people changed without ever knowing that they were changing. A people wholly of the water, whose children swam before they walked, whose old women knew the tide better than any instrument we could build them, whose men went out past the white line of the reef in small lashed craft and came home at evening with the fish of the deep blue water lying in the bottom of the hull. The sea was no longer the wall at the end of the world. It had become, without any announcement, a part of their country, a place they worked in, and moved on, and understood, a flaw rather than a barrier. The biggest and richest of all the fields their family had ever learned to harvest. They still did not cross it. They had no reason to, and no thought of it. But they were, at last, a people who could. There they are then, the shore folk coming in through the surf at evening with the day's fish and the sun going down behind them. Let your breath go slow, and let us look now, softly and very closely, at the small lashed craft they are riding home upon, at the making of the first boats in the world. So let us draw close now, gently, and look at the boats, and let me tell you softly and at the outset, the honest thing about them, because it is a strange and rather beautiful sorrow at the heart of this whole story. We do not have them. We will never have them. Not one single scrap of the first craft our family ever built has come down to us, and not one ever will. Everything else has survived, more or less. The stone tools last forever, the bones keep, the shells and the charcoal and the ash all lie patiently in the ground for 60,000 years waiting to be found and read. But a boat made of wood and bamboo and vine in a hot, wet country does not last 60,000 years. It does not last 60. It goes back to the forest within a season or two of being left on a beach. The vines rot, the bamboo splits and greys and crumbles, the wood softens and goes to nothing, and the rain and the ants and the warm green world take all of it back, entirely, leaving no trace whatsoever for anyone to find. The greatest invention of that whole age, the thing that carried our family into a new world, was made of exactly the materials that vanish. And so we have the fish they caught with it, and we have the far shore they reached in it, and of the thing itself we have nothing at all. But we are not without knowing, for all that, and here is where it becomes rather wonderful. We can reason our way toward those boats, patiently and honestly, from 3 directions at once, and where the 3 agree we may hold the picture gently and with some confidence. We know what grew on those shores, and therefore what they had to work with. We know what their hands could do, because we have their stone tools and we can see the work in them, and we know what their far descendants built, in those same waters, out of those same plants, using ways that were old beyond memory when the first outsiders ever wrote them down. None of that gives us a photograph, but it gives us a shape, and the shape it gives is consistent and sensible and lovely. So let us build one now, in the mind on the warm sand, out of the materials that were actually to hand. And let us be honest at every step about what we know and what we are only reaching for. There is no strain in that honesty, and nothing to trouble you. It is simply the pleasure of imagining well. And the first thing to say, and it is the loveliest thing, and the answer to almost everything, is that those shores had bamboo. Feel what a gift that is, for it is hard to overstate. Bamboo grows in that warm, wet country in vast thickets, straight and light and long, and it is very nearly the perfect material for a person with stone tools and no metal at all. It is hollow and sealed shut at every joint, so that each length of it is not merely light, but is in fact a row of watertight chambers full of air, a natural float, better than anything you could carve. It is strong along its length, and it will not easily break. It splits cleanly and predictably. It can be cut with stone. It weighs almost nothing, so that a person can carry a stem on one shoulder that would float 3 of them. And it grows everywhere, freely, endlessly, replacing itself faster than any people could ever use it up. If you set out deliberately to design a plant for a barefoot people who wanted to get out onto the water, you could not do better than bamboo. It was simply there, all along that coast in unlimited supply, waiting, so picture the making of a raft, on the sand, in the shade. Over some unhurried days, and picture it as a family thing, and a talking thing, and rather a pleasant one. The stems are cut in the thicket behind the shore and carried down. They are laid out side by side on the beach, thick ends and thin ends alternated so that the whole lies square and balanced. Cross pieces are laid over and under, and then comes the long patient work that is the heart of it, the lashing. Vine and cane and split rattan and cord twisted from the fibres of the forest, wound and hitched and drawn tight at every crossing, turn upon turn upon turn, by hands that have done it since childhood, and do it now without looking, talking all the while of other things. It takes a long time. Everyone helps. The children are given the small jobs and get in the way, and are shooed off and come back. And at the end of it there is a thing lying on the sand that will float a whole family and their gear and their fire and their water, and that took nothing in all the world but the forest behind the beach, some stone, and a great many patient hours of ordinary human hands. And feel the small deep cleverness of it, for these were not crude things, and we should not let ourselves imagine them so. Consider only the water. Fresh water is the one thing the sea will not give you, and it is the thing that kills people at sea long before hunger ever does, and any craft that means to be out for days must carry it. And bamboo, the very stuff the raft is made of, is a vessel. Each length between two joints is a sealed tube, and you have only to pierce the joint and pour, and stop it with a plug of leaf or wood, and you have a flask that is already a part of the boat. Nothing needs to be invented, nothing needs to be carried that is not already there. Or, consider the fire. A people who have carried fire all their lives are not going to leave it behind because they are on water, and a raft of green bamboo with a bed of sand or clay laid on it will carry a small fire quite safely across the sea, so that whatever shore they come to it with the flame their grandmothers lit. These are not brilliant inventions. They are the small obvious rightnesses that occur to any people who have lived with a material for 1,000 generations, and they are exactly what makes such a craft possible. And there were other kinds of craft too, in all likelihood, and we should not flatten them into one. For a people that far into a skill does not have only one tool, any more than your kitchen has only one knife. There was surely the dugout, a good log felled and hollowed out with fire and stone adze, burning and scraping and burning and scraping over many days until a shell of wood remains that cuts the water far better than any raft ever could. That is slow work and hungry work, and it asks for good tools. But it is not beyond them, and its reward is a craft that goes where you point it. There were probably floats of bundled reed or cane in the calmer places. There were surely different craft for different waters, small light things for the lagoon and the river, heavier things for outside the reef. And here honesty asks a word of me, gently, when people in our own time have built rafts of bamboo and taken them out into a hard sea to try them. The rafts have sometimes struggled badly and moved too slowly to beat a strong current, and left the trying crews quite sure that something better made would have been needed. That is a real finding, and we should not wave it away. But it may only mean that the answer was the dugout rather than the raft, or that it was some cleverer thing than we have thought to build, or simply that a modern crew with a week's practice is not the same as a people with 50,000 years of it in their hands. The honest summary is the good one. We do not know what they built. We know only, and beyond any argument at all, that whatever it was, it worked. And feel the testing of it, for this is the warm human middle of the whole business, and it is where I would have your mind rest. Nobody's first raft crossed an ocean. The first raft was pushed out into the lagoon on a still afternoon by a crowd of laughing people to see whether it would swim at all, and it did, more or less, and someone fell off, and everyone shouted. And then it was taken out again, and improved, and taken out again. The children rode it in the shallows. Somebody tried standing on it and found where it would tip. Somebody loaded it heavy to see what it would take. Somebody was out on it when a squall came through, and got home wet and shaken, and told everyone at the fire that evening exactly what the thing had done and what he would do differently. And that story was worth more than the raft. Year upon year, that is how it went. Playing, trying, loading, failing safely, and talking about it afterward around a fire. Every seaworthy craft in the history of the world is the child of 1,000 harmless afternoons in a lagoon. There they are then, the makers on the warm sand, lashing bamboo in the shade while the children ride the finished thing about the shallows. Let your breath go slow, and let us follow them now. Softly, out past the reef at last, to the first islands and the first crossings, and the long gentle hopping eastward across a scattered sea. So let us go out with them now, gently past the white line of the reef, and see what actually lay out there, for the sea beyond that last eastern shore was not the empty blue nothing they might have supposed. It was scattered with islands. Picture it from above, drowsily, the way a bird might see it. Not one great open ocean, but a long strewn archipelago, hundreds of islands of every size. Some vast and mountainous with clouds standing over their peaks, some no more than a green scrap with a beach and a few palms, all of them lying in a great scattered chain running away to the east and the south, with straits and channels of blue water threading between them. It is one of the loveliest and most complicated corners of the whole world's sea, and it lay there waiting, all through those ages, just beyond the sight of the people on the shore, a whole scattered country of islands, and every one of them empty, and every one of them reachable, by any people patient enough and skilled enough to hop from one to the next. And here is the deep strange thing about those islands, and it is worth holding gently, for it shaped everything that followed. Those islands had never been joined to anything, not to the mainland behind, not to the great land ahead, not to each other. Even in the deepest cold of the ice ages, when the seas of the world drew back their furthest, and the drowned shelves came up dry, and the map of the world was redrawn, even then this scattered middle sea stayed sea. The water between those islands is old and deep, dropping away into trenches that no falling sea level could ever empty. And so, however far the ocean withdrew, there was always water there. The gap never closed. It was, and it remained, the one place on the whole earth where our family's long dry walk out of Africa simply could not continue. A broken country, a scattering of stepping stones, with deep blue water between every one of them, sitting square across the road to the last unpeopled continent on earth. And you can see what that means, and it is beautiful. Everything alive on those islands had to have crossed water to get there. And so the life out there was strange, and thin, and wonderfully odd, where the great animals of Asia, the elephants, the tigers, the rhinoceros, the deer in their herds, could walk out across the dry shelf as far as its edge and no further. Out in the scattered islands there were almost none of them. What was there instead was whatever had managed the crossing, the birds who simply flew, the bats, the seeds that floated or were carried in a bird's gut, the rats and lizards that came drifting on rafts of storm-torn vegetation, and, here and there, the strange descendants of some animal that had made it long ago and then gone quietly odd in isolation, growing giant or growing dwarf on its own small island with nothing to check it. It is a scattered, patchy, curious sort of life, unmistakable to anyone who looks. And it is the surest proof in the world that these islands were, and always had been, truly separate. The animals could not cross. Our family could. And there is one more thing waiting out among those islands, and it is a strange, soft wonder, so let it come gently and ask nothing of you. Our family was not the first kind of human to get out there. Long, long before, hundreds of thousands of years before, so far back that the distance between them and our first seafarers is greater than the distance between our seafarers and you, other kinds of people had somehow reached some of those islands, and had lived there, and had gone quietly odd in the way that island things do. On one of them there lived, for an immense span of time, a kind of human who stood only about as tall as a young child, small-boned and small-headed and entirely themselves, hunting and making tools and keeping fires on their own green island in the middle of that sea. Nobody knows how their ancestors ever got across the water. Nobody knows whether they drifted there by accident on some storm-torn raft of trees, or whether they too, in their own way, went. And nobody knows whether our people ever met them. The dates come close, tantalizingly close, but close is not the same as certain, and no one has yet found the two of them in the same place at the same time. But feel this, which we do know, and which is written in the bodies of living people today, somewhere out in that broad island world. Our family met another kind of human being, and did not merely pass them by. We know it because the trace is still there. The people of those eastern islands and of the great southern land carry, in their Dina, a small quiet inheritance from a people we barely know at all, a cousin branch of humanity so faintly recorded that we have only a few scraps of bone and a mouthful of teeth to go by, and yet whose blood is nonetheless still running, right now, in the veins of their descendants. So somewhere out there, on some island, in some warm season 60 or 70,000 years ago, two kinds of human being met and got to know one another and had children together, and those children were loved and grew up and had children of their own, and the line came down, unbroken, all the way to the present day. We do not know one single detail of it. We know only that it was not a battle. It was a family. And feel how the hopping went, for it went exactly as everything in this story goes, gently and slowly, and without anyone ever deciding anything grand. Picture the people on their eastern shore on a fine, clear morning after rain, when the air has been washed and you can see forever. And out there, low on the water, is a shape. An island. Not a guess, not a hope, a plain visible fact, sitting there on the sea, perhaps a day's paddle off, sometimes near enough to see the surf on it. Now that is a very different proposition from the open blue. That is not a leap into nothing. That is simply a longer version of the thing they have done all their lives. So one day some young people go and look. And they come back and tell everyone about it at the fire, and then people go again and stay a night and come back and say the fishing there is untouched. And within a few generations there are families living there, and it is not an island anymore. It is simply home, the place their children were born. And there is another shape on the horizon further east, and the whole thing begins again. And feel how long each of those steps took, for this is what makes it so gentle. We are speaking of thousands of years to cross that scattered sea. A chain of islands that a modern boat could run in a fortnight took our family, in all likelihood, hundreds of generations. And that is not slowness. That is the shape of a good life. Nobody was hurrying, because nobody was going anywhere. Each island, once reached, was a whole world and a whole home, and it was lived in, properly lived in, for 1,000 years or 5,000, with everything that means children born and grown and buried, a language changing, songs made, the whole shape of a country learned by heart, all its seasons and its foods and its weather and its stories. The crossing to the next island was not an onward march. It was just what one restless family did, one season, for its own reasons, having heard from the fishermen that there was land out there and good fishing on it. And they were the exception, not the rule. Almost everyone stayed. The eastward drift is only visible to us, looking back from a great height across an enormous depth of time. To them there was no drift at all, only home and a good life in it, and now and then a cousin who went away. And they got good, feel that for the skill was compounding all the while. Every island crossed was a lesson taught to the whole people. Each strait had its own character, its currents, its winds, its seasons, the times of day when it lay down, and the times when it stood up. And each one, once learned, made the next one easier, because the learning was general. How to read a channel, how to load a craft for open water, how to judge a crossing, how to sit out a bad day and wait for a good one. By the time our family had worked its way out through that scattered sea, they had crossings behind them by the dozen, short ones and long ones, easy ones and hard ones, some of them of a good many miles of open water with nothing to see but blue. They were not novices any more, out on a mad first venture. They were, by then, the most experienced open water people who had ever lived on the earth. A people with an unbroken tradition of sea crossing running back further than their own oldest stories, so old that nobody could have told you when it started, or thought to ask. And feel the wonder of what they were seeing, all the while, without ever knowing what it meant, for as they went east across that scattered sea, the world changed around them. The animals of the great western lands fell away and did not follow. And then, further east, other creatures began to appear that no one had ever seen anywhere in all the long road out of Africa. Soft-furred things that carried their young in a pouch on the belly, and moved differently, and belonged to a family of life wholly separate from anything back west. They were crossing, without any possible way of knowing it, one of the deepest divides on the face of the earth, the seam where two great and ancient worlds of living things meet and do not mingle, because the deep water between them has held them apart since long before our kind existed. To us, that is a marvel of the map. To them it was simply the changing of the game as one went further out. But they saw it, those people. They were the first of our whole family ever to look at a pouched animal in a tree and wonder what on earth it was. There they are then, out among the islands, a scattering of families across a scattered sea, each on its own green home, generation upon generation, drifting east without ever meaning to. Let your breath go slow, and let us look now, softly, at the great skill they were building all this while, at the reading of the water itself. So let us go out on the water with them now, gently, in the early light, and learn to read it. For this is the most beautiful skill in the whole of our story, and one of the most beautiful our kind has ever had, and there is no better place for a drowsy mind to rest than in the middle of it. And let me say the honest thing first, softly, so that it can lie there and not trouble you. We do not know what those first people knew. Nobody wrote any of it down. For nobody could write. Nothing of it survives in the ground, for knowing does not fossilize. What we have instead is this. We know that their far descendants, in those same waters and out across the great ocean beyond, held a body of sea knowledge so precise and so deep that the first Europeans who met it could scarcely believe what they were seeing. Men who could find an island 100 miles off, with no instrument of any kind, and be right. That knowledge was old past reckoning. It was not invented late. And so when we picture the first seafarers reading their water, we are not making it up out of nothing. We are looking at the far end of a thread that we can actually see, and reasoning gently backwards along it. We may be wrong in the details, but the shape of the thing is real, and so feel the swell first, for it is the deepest and strangest of all the sea's knowings, and the loveliest to drift on. Out on the open water there is always a swell running, the long low rolling of the sea, born of winds blowing far away over the horizon, marching steadily across the ocean for days and hundreds of miles, arriving here from some storm you will never see. And a swell, once it is running, is astonishingly faithful. It keeps its direction and its rhythm, and it does not much care about the little local wind that ruffles the surface. So if you know your swell, if you know that at this season the great swell comes from over there, then you have a compass that works in the dark, and in the rain, and under a sky so overcast that there is not one star to be had. You do not even need to see it. You can feel it, the long, slow lift and settle of the craft beneath you, coming in at a certain angle to your body, always the same hour after hour. And a person who has sat in a hull since childhood feels a change in that rhythm the way you would feel someone alter the pitch of the floor beneath your chair. Picture that as you lie there in the warmth, steering all night in the black dark by the way the sea rocks you, and feel the birds, for they are the kindest of all the sea's signs and the easiest to love. There are birds out there that sleep on the water and mean nothing at all, but there are others that do not. Birds that must come home to land every night, because that is where they roost. And so, in the last of the evening, out on the empty blue you watch, and when the birds come, they come flying with purpose, low and straight and unhesitating, and every one of them is going the same way. They are going home. And home is land. You do not know how far, and you do not know what kind, but you know the direction with a certainty no argument can shake, because a bird does not fly at dusk toward nothing, and in the morning it runs the other way. The birds go out from the land at first light, streaming past you in the opposite direction, and if you have kept your wits and your patience through the night, then you have only to follow them back at evening. It is the simplest thing in the world, and the most reliable, and our family surely knew it out there 60,000 years ago, just as their descendants knew it, because it is not a technique so much as a thing that a watchful people cannot help but notice. And feel the clouds, for the sky over an unseen island tells on it. An island stands in the warm air and heats in the sun and sends its warmth up, and the moist air rises over it and cools and makes a cloud, and that cloud stands still. All the other clouds in the sky are travelling with the wind, going by overhead, but that one sits, hour after hour, anchored over something. And so, out on an empty sea, with nothing in sight at all, a person who knows how to look at the sky can say, there is land under that. There is another, gentler sign still, which the far navigators of those waters certainly used, and which I love. The underside of a cloud takes the colour of what lies beneath it. Over deep water it is dark and grey, but over the pale, shallow sand of a lagoon it can carry the faintest wash of green, like a stain of light. To read that you must know exactly what you are looking at and have looked at it your whole life. But it is there to be read, and it has been read. And it means that an island can be seen in a way before it is seen at all, its reflection thrown up on the clouds above it. And feel the stars, for the night is the sea's great gift to a traveller, and this is the picture I would most have you hold. Out on open water the sky is enormous and perfectly clear and utterly dark, and the stars are not a scattering but a crowd, thick and bright and layered, more than you have likely ever seen in your life. And they are not random. Each star rises at its own fixed place on the eastern rim, and sets at its own fixed place on the western rim, night after night, season after season, and does not change within a human lifetime, or 10, or 1,000. So a people who watch the sky every night of their lives, and these people watched it every night of their lives, do not need to invent astronomy to steer by it. They need only to notice, as anyone would, that a certain star always comes up over there. And then you hold your bow to it while it is low, and when it rises too high to be of use, another comes up behind it in the same place, and you take that one, and then another, and so all night long one star handed on to the next. Like a line of people passing something down a beach, you are kept true. Picture that. Softly, as you sink, a family out on the dark, warm water, and a whole slow wheel of stars above them, and someone in the stern watching a low bright one on the rim of the world and keeping the bow just there. And there were a dozen other signs besides, and they are lovely to drowse among, so let them drift over you gently now, with no need to hold any of them. The colour of the water, and where it changes, the drift of things upon it, the floating weed, the branch with leaves still green on it, which cannot have been long from land, the reef fish or the shore bird seen far out, where it has no business being. The smell, which is a real thing and a strong one, land smells, and a person coming in from days at sea can smell green-growing country and smoke long before there is anything at all to see. And smoke itself, of course, for on any island where our family already lives there is a fire, and a fire makes a thin blue thread that stands up above the horizon and can be seen a very long way indeed, and says, more plainly than any signal ever devised, people, here, not one of these signs is much use alone. All of them together, in the hands of someone who has been reading them since she was small, add up to something we have no proper word for, not navigation exactly, but a kind of listening, a conversation with the water and the air and the sky, carried on continuously, all day and all night, by a person who was never taught it and could not tell you how she does it. And feel the wind and the year, for the greatest of all their readings was not of a day but of a season, and it is the most restful thing to think about. That warm corner of the world does not have one weather, it has two, and they take it in turns, and they are as regular as a heartbeat. For half the year the wind comes steadily from one quarter, and for the other half it turns around and comes just as steadily from the other, and between the two there are the changeovers, when the air goes slack and confused, and the sea does as it pleases. A people who have lived there forever do not think of this as weather at all. They think of it as the shape of the year, as ordinary and as dependable as the fact that summer follows spring. And so they knew, without ever needing to say it, that there were months when the wind and the water would carry a craft one way, and months when they would carry it back, and months when a sensible person stayed on the beach. That is not a small thing. That is the difference between a hopeful push into the blue and a considered voyage, and it means that when at last somebody did go, they almost certainly went in the season that 1,000 years of watching had told them was the right one, with the wind at their backs, on purpose, having waited for it, and feel the patience in that, for it is the quietest virtue in the whole of this story, and the one I would most like you to rest on. Everything about these people was patience. They waited for the tide, every single day of their lives. They waited for the fruiting season, and the fish to run, and the rain to come. They waited out the bad wind and the wrong months. They sat on a beach for whole generations with a gap of open water in front of them, watching it, learning it, talking about it, and not going, not because they could not, but because it was not time. And when they finally went, it was not because someone lost patience at last. It was because patience had finally finished its work, and everything was ready, and the wind was right. And the craft was good, and the water was aboard, and the season had come round again as it always did. Ours is an age that admires the sudden and the bold. Their whole enormous achievement was made of waiting, and watching, and getting it right, and it is worth remembering as you lie there in the warm dark, that the greatest voyage in the history of our kind was undertaken by people who had learned, over 50,000 years, that almost everything comes to those who are willing to sit still and let it. And feel, above all, that this was not written down and did not need to be, for the knowing lived in people and was handed from body to body, hand to hand, the way everything of value was handed in that world. A child sat in the hull beside her grandmother from the age of 4, on trip after trip after trip, and was shown things, and asked things, and told things 10,000 times over, until it was not knowledge she had learned, but simply the way the world was. There was no school, and no chart, and no instrument. And there did not need to be, because there was something better, an unbroken living tradition, taught by doing, in the actual boat, on the actual water, generation after generation, without one break in the chain, for tens of thousands of years. That is a fragile way to keep a treasure, and a mighty one. And it worked. There they are then, the sea readers, out on the bright morning water, watching the swell and the birds and the standing cloud, knowing exactly where they are on a sea with nothing in it. Let your breath go slow, and let us turn now, softly, to the one thing all this knowing had been quietly preparing them for, the last island and the great gap and the land nobody could see. So let us come now, gently, to the last island, to the furthest stepping stone at the eastern edge of that scattered sea, where the hopping ran out at last and something entirely new lay waiting. Picture it, a good island, a real one, with hills and fresh water and forest and a long shore, lived on for a great while by families who had been born there and whose grandparents had been born there, so that it was not a waypoint at all, but simply the world. And picture the shore that faces east and south out toward the deep. Every island they had taken until now had been taken the same way, by looking out on a clear morning and seeing the next one sitting there plainly on the water and going to it. But from this shore there was nothing. The water ran out to the rim of the sky and stopped, and there was no green shape upon it anywhere, and beyond it, so far as any eye could tell, there was simply the end of the world. The chain of stones had brought them here, and here the chain ended, and the sea went on without them. And feel how wide that gap was, and be gentle with the number, for it is the whole hinge of the story. The open water between that last island and whatever lay beyond was something on the order of 60 or 70 miles at its narrowest, and it may well have been more, and it was certainly more on some of the possible ways across. Now hold that against everything that had gone before. The crossings behind them had been the kind of thing a person might do between a late breakfast and an early supper, with the island you were leaving still in sight behind you before the island you were going to came up ahead. This was not that. This was a day and a night on the water, at the least, and quite possibly 2 days and 2 nights, or more if the wind failed or the current set against them. This was going out until the world you knew sank away behind you and did not come back, and staying out there in a small craft on an enormous ocean, with your children aboard, through a whole night of darkness, and a whole day, and perhaps another night, on the strength of nothing but a belief that there was something on the other side. And here we must be honest again, and gently, because the scholars are not entirely agreed, and it would be wrong of me to hand you a tidy certainty that does not exist. The question is simply this: could they see it? Was there anything at all out there for an eye to catch, some far blue smudge on a perfect day, the merest hint of a hill on the rim of the world? Or were they looking at plain empty water? And the truthful answer is that it depends on exactly where they stood, and exactly where the sea level was, and exactly how clear the air happened to be that morning, and that reasonable people who have studied it very carefully have come to different conclusions. Some have modelled it and found that from the last islands themselves there was nothing to be seen, that the land beyond stayed stubbornly below the curve of the earth however high you climbed. Others, working with better maps of the drowned sea floor, have found the opposite, that from the high places of those last islands, on a clear day, you could indeed raise something, not the great land itself perhaps, but a string of islands out there that are now deep under water, and from those, the land. We do not know. Let that sit easy, for it does not need resolving tonight. But feel this, which we can say with much more confidence, and which is in some ways lovelier than seeing. Whether or not there was anything to see, there was certainly something to know. The sea itself was talking about that land every day to anyone who understood the language, and by now these were the people who understood it better than anyone alive. Birds went out that way in the morning and came back at evening, and had done so, visibly, every day for the whole of everyone's life. Things came ashore on the eastern beaches after a blow, driftwood, seed pods, whole floating branches, things that had grown somewhere. There were clouds that stood in one place out there over nothing day after day and did not travel with the others. Perhaps at night, in the right season, there was even a faint glow on the underside of the far sky, which is the kind of thing a fire makes, and which might have been anything or nothing, or a lightning storm over a distant coast. None of it is proof. All of it together over hundreds of years of watching by thousands of people who were expert at exactly this adds up to something very close to certainty. There is land out there. We are not looking at the end of the world. We are looking at a gap. And feel how long they must have sat with that, for it is the tenderest part of the whole business. Nobody rushed. There is no reason to think anyone rushed. Picture the generations on that last shore, people who had grown up hearing, as an ordinary and undoubted piece of common knowledge, that there was land away out east, people for whom this was not a discovery or a rumour, but simply a fact about the world, as settled and as unremarkable as the fact that the tide comes in. They talked about it, surely, the way people talk about a thing that has always been talked about, at the fire, in the evening, without heat, without any particular resolve, for hundreds of years. And most of them, of course, never went. Why would they? They had a good island, and the fishing was fine, and their families were there, and their dead were there, and their whole world was there, and it was enough. The land out east was a thing that everyone knew about and nobody needed. That is not cowardice. It is contentment, and it is by far the most common and most sensible thing our family has ever felt. The gap was not a challenge. It was just the edge of a very good life, and it stayed that way for a very long time. And yet, and here is the quiet marvel, they went. And this we do know, and it is worth resting on, because it is the one thing in this story that the evidence itself insists upon and will not let us soften. They did not blunder out there. Whatever picture you may carry of a poor fishing family swept away by a storm and washed up by luck on a far beach, the scholars have looked hard at that. And it does not work, and the reason is beautifully simple. A castaway does not found a people. One craft blown out to sea and cast ashore gives you a handful of frightened survivors, most likely all of one sex, with no tools and no seed and no future, and they die, and the beach is empty again, and nothing has happened. To put a living people on a new continent, a people that goes on, that grows, that fills a land, you need numbers. You need women and men and children together. You need, by the best reckoning anyone has managed, something in the region of 1,000 or more people, arriving either all at once or, far more likely, in party after party after party, 100 or so at a time, over centuries. That is not an accident. Storms do not do that. That is people going on purpose again and again because they meant to. And so picture the last island now, in the evening, with the fires burning above the beach, and the whole familiar world of it lying warm and settled around them. And, out on the eastern water, the dark coming up over a gap that everybody knew was there and nobody could see across. They had the craft. They had the water in the bamboo and the fire on its bed of clay. They had 50,000 years of the sea in their hands and 100 crossings behind them, and a grandmother in every band who could find her way home in the dark by the feel of the swell. They had, in short, everything they needed, and had had it for a very long while. And so, one season, on some morning we shall never know anything about, in weather that somebody judged to be right, a few families who had made up their minds carried their children down to the water. There they are then, the last island, and the fires and the long dark gap lying out beyond them under the stars. Let your breath go slow, and let us go with them now, softly, out onto the open water at last, on the first true ocean crossing in the history of the world. So let us go, gently, and let us go slowly, and let it be calm, for there is nothing frightening waiting for us out there tonight, and nothing at all for you to brace against. Picture the morning of it, early, before the heat, with the light coming grey and then gold along the beach, and the sea lying down easy, breathing its long quiet breath against the sand. The craft are loaded. It has taken days. There is water in the sealed bamboo, and dried fish, and roots and fruit. There is a small fire banked low on its bed of clay, with someone's whole attention on it. There are digging sticks and adzes and cord, and spare cordage, and the good stone that is too precious to leave. There are the paddles. And there are the people, not a crew, not a company of chosen men, but families. The young men and the young women, the mothers with the small ones on their hips, someone's grandmother settling herself amidships with the unhurried authority of a woman who has been on more water than anyone else present. The children are excited. Somebody has forgotten something. Somebody is arguing mildly about where a bundle should go. It is, in almost every particular, an ordinary morning. And picture the leaving softly, for it was surely the strangest thing in it, the pushing off, the wading out, the last hands on the hull, the people staying behind standing in the shallows and on the sand. Because some stayed. That is the part I find hardest and dearest. For every family that went out that morning there were others who did not, who had said their goodbyes on the beach and would stand there watching until the craft was specks, and who would never in all their lives know what happened. No word would come back. There was no way for word to come back. Whatever became of those people out there, whether they found the land, whether they made a home on it, whether they lived long and well and had grandchildren, or whether the sea simply took them, the ones on the beach would never learn it. They would talk about it at the fire for a generation, and then for another, and then it would go into the stories, and no one would ever know. Picture them standing there in the wash with the water round their ankles, shading their eyes, watching their sons and daughters and grandchildren grow small on the bright water, and then vanish. That is love of a very high order, and it happened, and no one ever wrote a word of it down. And feel the day at sea, for it was long and slow and, I think, mostly rather beautiful. The island falls away behind, the beach going first, then the trees, then the shape of the hills, until there is only a low blue swelling on the rim of the sky, and then a while when you are not sure whether you can still see it, or are only remembering where it was, and then nothing at all. And now the world is water. Water to the flat far edge of everything, in every direction, all the way round, and the great bowl of the sky over it, and the small craft in the middle with the people on it, and no other thing in all creation. The sun goes up, and gets hot. The swell rolls under them, long and slow, lifting and settling, endlessly patient. Someone paddles for a while, and then someone else. Water is past. Somebody sleeps, right there in the bottom of the hull, in the sun, with an arm over her eyes, because there is nothing to do and you may as well. The children who are so excited at dawn are bored by noon, for even this, even the first ocean crossing in the history of the world, is mostly just a long hot day of sitting still and being patient, and feel what they had aboard, for it is a short list and a moving one. There were no crops in that boat, for nobody on earth had yet thought of a crop. No seed to plant, no animals to breed, no wheel, no metal, no pot, no cloth, no written word, no map. Everything they owned would have fitted, easily, into the corner of an ordinary room: some stone, some cord, some sticks, some food, some water. A fire. And that is all they were carrying, except that it was not all, of course, not remotely. For the real cargo was invisible, and they were sitting on top of it. They carried a language, rich and complete, with a word for everything in a world they were about to leave, and no word yet for anything in the world they were going to. They carried every skill their people had ever learned, held in their hands and their heads, and nowhere else at all. They carried the songs and the stories, and the way you speak to your mother's brother, and the right way to bury someone you love, and how to make fire, and how to find water, and what to do when a child will not stop crying. They were carrying a whole civilization across an ocean, and none of it weighed anything, and all of it was in their heads, and if that boat had gone down, every bit of it would have gone down with it. And feel the night, for it is the loveliest part, and the deepest to rest in. The sun goes down into the water ahead or behind, and the whole sky burns and cools, and then the dark comes on, and with it the stars, and out there 60,000 years ago, with no lamp burning anywhere on the face of the whole earth, the stars are almost past believing. They come out in their thousands and their tens of thousands, layer upon layer, so thick that the dark between them is crowded, hanging down over the water on every side and shining back up out of it. And the little craft sits in the middle of that, on the slow black breathing swell, with its one small fire glowing on its clay, the only fire in all the world's ocean. The people talk low, or do not talk. Someone sings, quietly, because it is a long night. The children sleep in a heap under a mat, exactly as children sleep in the back of a car on a long drive now, having decided that the grown-ups have it in hand. And someone sits in the stern all night, with her hand on the steering paddle, watching a low bright star on the rim of the world, feeling the swell come in under her at its proper angle, keeping the bow just so, hour after hour after hour, while everyone she loves sleeps behind her on the water. And feel softly, without any fear in it, the not knowing, for that is the true weight of the thing, and it is worth honouring gently before we let it go. They did not know. That is what makes it what it is. They did not know how far. They did not know how long. They did not know whether the thing they had reasoned out from the birds and the driftwood and the standing clouds was really there at all, or whether it was 100 miles further than they had allowed for, or whether it was a bare rock with nothing on it. They had no chart and no coast to run back to, and no way of being certain of anything whatsoever. And they went anyway, not with a shout, not with any heroics, but in the way that people actually do such things, quietly, having thought about it for a long time, having judged the weather, with their family around them and their water aboard and their fire lit. Whatever we mean by courage, it has never had a purer shape than that, and it is not the courage of a bright moment, It is the low, steady kind that lasts through a whole night at sea and asks for no witnesses. And there were none. Nobody was watching. Nobody ever knew. And then, at last, and let it come gently, for it came gently, the land. Perhaps a bird first, an unexpected one, going somewhere with purpose. Perhaps a change in the swell, the great rhythm faltering and confusing as it does when something big is out there breaking it up. Perhaps a cloud that stood still. Perhaps only a low grey line, seen by whoever happened to be looking. That might have been anything, and that everyone stared at for an hour before it was allowed to be true. And then the slow coming up of it, over hours, out of the rim of the world, a shape ashore, hills behind, the green of trees, the white of surf, along a beach. Picture the people in that hull. The ones who have been out there a day and a night, and perhaps another day, cramped and salt-crusted and thirsty, with the children fretting, all of them looking the same way at once. It is not a triumph. There is no word for what it is. It is the largest ordinary relief that any human being has ever felt. Land, and therefore water, land, and therefore food, land, and therefore we are going to be all right. And picture the landfall itself, softly, for it is one of the great moments in the whole story of our kind, and it deserves to be seen as it truly was, small and wet and human. The hull grates on sand. Somebody goes over the side into the shallows, and the water is warm and only waist deep, and the bottom is firm and blessedly still. The craft is hauled up the beach by everybody, the way a boat has been hauled up a beach by everybody in every age since. The children are lifted down and set on their feet and immediately run off. Because they are children, and they have been sitting still for a day and a half. Everyone stands about on legs that have forgotten how to be legs, swaying slightly on a beach that no human foot has ever touched. And then somebody says, in a language we shall never hear a syllable of, the only thing anyone ever says at such a moment, "Where is the water?" And they go and find a stream coming down out of the green, and they drink, all of them, on their knees in the sand, and it is the sweetest drink any of them will ever have in their lives. There they are then, the first ocean crossing in the history of the world, ended in a warm shallow surf with everybody wading ashore and the children already running. Let your breath go slow, and let us walk up that beach with them now, softly, into a continent that no one had ever seen. So let us walk up the beach with them, gently, and stand where they stood. And let us take a moment first, drowsily, to feel what they had actually done, since they could not possibly have known it themselves. They had come to a continent, not an island, not another green stepping stone in a scattered sea, but a whole new world of a landmass, vast beyond any imagining they could have brought with them, running away south and east from that beach for thousands upon thousands of miles. In that age of low seas it was all one great country, the lands we now call by separate names, joined into a single continent by all the dry shelf between them, one enormous warm land with mountains and deserts and rivers and rainforest and grassland and snow, entire climates and worlds within it, hanging there at the bottom of the earth. And it was empty. Not thinly peopled, not peopled elsewhere, empty. There was no one. In all that immensity of country, from the beach where they stood to the furthest southern shore, there was not one single human being, and there never had been in all the ages since the world began. They had just walked out of the sea into the last unpeopled continent on earth, and they thought that they had found an island, and feel the shore itself that they landed on, for there is a strange gentle sorrow in it, and it is worth a moment. That beach is gone. The coast those first people came ashore on, the actual sand their feet touched, the stream they knelt and drank from, the headland they must have named, the place where they slept that first night, all of it is now far out to sea and deep beneath it. For the world was cold then, and the seas were low, and this continent wore a great skirt of dry land all around its northern edge, hundreds of miles of it. A whole country of coastal plain and river valley and lagoon that stood in the sun for tens of thousands of years and is now the seafloor. That was the land they landed on. That is where the first fires burned, and where the first generations lived and died, and where the oldest camps of all must lie. And when the ice at last melted and the water came back, over thousands of patient years, all of it went under. The beach, the camps, the fires, the whole first chapter of a people, drowned and quiet under a warm, shallow sea, out where nobody digs. The very oldest part of this story is not lost. It is just underwater. And feel the strangeness of what they had walked into, for this was not another version of home. Everything was wrong, in the most fascinating way. The trees were not their trees, the smell of the forest was not the smell of any forest they had ever been in, dry, sharp, oily, a smell no human nose had ever met. The birds were enormous and loud and wholly unfamiliar, and some of them laughed. And the animals. Oh, the animals. This was a continent that had been going its own way, entirely alone, since long before there were people anywhere on earth, and everything that walked on it belonged to that other great family of life, whose young are carried in a pouch. Picture the people coming up off that beach and into the country behind it and beginning, over the following days and weeks. To meet them, an animal the size of a large ox with vast blunt claws and a great heavy head, browsing peaceably in the scrub, kangaroos, but not the kangaroos we know, huge ones, standing well over the height of a man, with short flat faces, reaching up into the branches to pull them down, a bird taller than a person, flightless, thick-legged, stalking about on the plain, a goanna longer than a canoe lying in the sun. Nothing here was familiar. Nothing here had a name. They had to build the whole world again from nothing. And feel the tenderest thing about that new world, which is the same thing that is true of every place our kind has ever walked into first. The animals were not afraid. Everywhere else on earth, the animals had grown up alongside our family across 1,000,000 years, and had learned us, and knew the shape of us and the smell of us, and kept their careful distance. But here nothing had ever seen a person. And so the great browsing things went on browsing as the people came near, and the huge kangaroos raised their heads and looked, mild and curious and entirely unbothered, and the enormous birds stalked past at a distance that no wild bird would ever allow now. It must have been an extraordinary thing to walk into. A whole warm country full of great strange peaceable creatures that simply watched you go by. And it was a world that had its hunters too, of course, some of them formidable. But let them stay quietly out at the edges of the picture tonight, the way the people themselves would have kept them, with a bright fire and a wise wide berth and a good deal of common sense. There was room enough in all that vastness for everyone. And feel the first night, for it is the warm heart of the whole story and the picture I would most like you to hold as you soften. The day is going. They have found their water and drunk it and filled the bamboo. They have chosen a spot above the tide line where the sand is dry and there is shelter at the back and a good view out. And now somebody kneels down and makes a fire, with the ember carried all the way across the ocean on its little bed of clay, blown patiently back to life in a nest of dry grass from a land where no grass has ever burned for a person. And it catches. And it climbs. and the first firelight in the history of a continent goes out across the sand. Feel the size of that. Gently, one small fire on one beach at the edge of a country thousands of miles wide, in which there is no other flame at all, and never has been. The whole enormous dark land lies behind them, unlit, unpeopled, unknowing, from that beach to the far southern sea, and there is this one warm gold ring on the sand, with a few dozen tired people in it, and their children asleep, and their supper cooking, and everything they own. And picture them in that ring of light, softly, at the end of the longest journey anyone had ever made. They are exhausted, they are sunburnt and salt-stiff, and their hands are raw from the paddles. They have eaten, and the children went to sleep before the food was even finished, in a heap, the way children do. The old woman who steered all that long night is asleep sitting up. Somebody is doing what somebody always does, which is going round the craft in the last light, checking the lashings and pretending not to be proud of them. And they talk low in the firelight about ordinary things, about the water they found, about the strange trees, about the huge quiet animal somebody saw in the scrub, about whether the fishing looks any good, about where to go tomorrow. They are not celebrating. They do not know that anything has happened. They have merely arrived somewhere and made camp, as their people have made camp every night since the beginning, and they will sleep now and see what the morning brings. And beyond the little ring of the firelight, the new continent breathes in the dark, vast and warm and utterly still, waiting. And so let us leave them there for a moment, gently, and see it from very far above, the way no one could have seen it then. The whole enormous dark curve of a continent at the bottom of the world. Thousands of miles of mountain and plain and river and desert and forest lying black and silent under an enormous crowd of stars. And, on one beach at the top of it, one spark. That is all. One small fire on the edge of an empty world, with a few families sleeping around it. And everything that would ever come after, every camp and every hearth and every child and every song and every story of a people that is still there today, 65,000 years later, all of it folded up inside that one spark on that one beach. It is a small thing to look at, and it is one of the largest things that has ever happened. There they are then, the first fire on a new continent, burning low on a shore that is now deep under the sea, with the first people of a whole new world asleep around it. Let your breath go slow, and let us stay with them now, softly, and watch them do the slow, patient, human thing, the making of a home. So let us stay with them now, gently through the seasons that followed, and watch the slow, patient work of making a strange place into a home. For the crossing was the short part, and this was the long one, and it is by far the more human of the two. Picture the mornings of that first year on the new shore. Everything must be learned, and there is no one to ask. Which of these fruits is good? Which of these roots will feed you and which will make you ill? Which of these fish is worth the catching, and which of them has spines you had better respect? Where does the water run in the dry time? What does that cloud mean here, in this country, where the weather is not the weather they grew up under? They knew nothing. They had, for the first time in the whole long history of their people, walked into a land where the inherited knowledge of their grandmothers did not apply, where the ancient common sense that every band carries in its bones, built up over 100,000 years of living somewhere, was suddenly and completely useless. And so they did the only thing that could be done. They began, patiently, from the beginning, to find out. And feel how they did it, for it is one of the quiet glories of our kind, and it is lovely to rest in. They tasted things, carefully, a little at a time, watching, waiting, one person and a small mouthful and a day of seeing what happened. They watched the animals and noticed what the birds ate and reasoned from it. They learned by the slow accumulation of 1,000 small trials, and every single thing learned was told at the fire that night and became, from that evening on, the property of everybody. That is the trick. That is the whole trick. That is the thing our family has that nothing else on earth has. Not that any one of us is clever, but that nothing any of us learns is ever lost. One woman finds that a certain root, which is poisonous raw, becomes good food if you pound it and leach it in running water for a day and then roast it, and her granddaughter's granddaughter, 1,000 miles away and 500 years later, is still doing it, and has no idea that anyone ever had to work it out. That is how an empty continent becomes a home, not by conquest, but by an unimaginably patient conversation carried on across generations, in which everything anyone ever discovers is handed carefully on. And feel that they were not alone out there for long. For this is one of the loveliest findings of all, and it lets us set aside a lonely picture that we might otherwise be tempted by. They were not one heroic little band, marooned the others came. Party after party, family after family, over years and centuries, more craft. On other mornings, from other islands, made by other people who had also decided that it was time. It has to have been so. A people cannot be founded by a boatload. The land filled from the sea, gradually, in a long slow trickle of arrivals spread across a very long while, until there were enough. Enough hands, enough kin, enough young men and women who were not each other's cousins, enough of the deep human web to hold. And picture what that means on the ground. A band comes down to the beach one morning after some years in the new country, and there on the water is a craft coming in, with people on it, speaking a tongue they half know, from an island they remember. Picture that meeting. Picture what was said. We shall never know one word of it, but it happened. And it happened over and over, and it is the reason there is anybody there at all. And so feel the making of the life, for within a few generations it was not a strange land any more, it was simply theirs. They found the good stone, and learned what it would do. And here is a thing worth waking up a little for, because it is remarkable. In the very oldest layers of the very oldest camp yet found on that continent, among the tools that those first people left lying in the sand, are axes with a ground edge, stone axes whose working edge has been patiently rubbed and polished smooth against another stone, hour upon hour, to give it a strength and a keenness that a merely chipped edge can never have. They are, so far as anyone yet knows, the oldest such tools anywhere in the world. 65,000 years ago, on a shore at the end of everything, someone sat down with a lump of stone and a great deal of time and invented, or brought with them, a technique that the rest of the world would not take up for tens of thousands of years. These were not simple people who got lucky with a current. They were the most technically accomplished people on the planet at that moment, and they had just proved it twice. And feel the other things they left in that sand, for they are so human that they close the whole distance between us. There are grinding stones, flat slabs with a hollow worn in them, and a smooth round stone to work with, for crushing seeds into something that can be made into food, which is patient, unglamorous, ordinary domestic work, and which means women were there, and children, and a household, and supper. There is ochre, a great deal of ochre, red and yellow, brought from somewhere else, ground into powder on slabs kept for the purpose. Ochre is not food, and it is not a tool. Ochre is for putting on things, on skin, on bark, on wood, on a body at a burial. It is colour and pattern and meaning. It is art and it is ceremony and it is identity. And it was in the baggage of the very first arrivals, or made within days of their landing. Think about that. Softly as you drift, they crossed an ocean in an open boat with their children and their fire and their drinking water and their paint. Whatever they were not merely surviving. They arrived and they made a home and they decorated it, and feel how they spread once they were sure of the place. And here again it is the gentlest possible picture, and by now a familiar one. No march. No expedition. Only families living their lives and children growing up and going a little further along the river than their parents ever had, and settling there, and their children going further still. But the land was so vast, and the drift, though slow, was so utterly patient, that in what is really an astonishingly short span of deep time they were everywhere. Down the great rivers and out onto the plains, up into the high cold country where the snow lies, into the dry red interior where they learn to find water in a land that offers almost none, which may be the single most impressive thing our family has ever learned to do anywhere, through the rainforest, all the way to the far southern shore and the cold sea beyond, and out to the islands off it. Within a handful of 1,000 years, a blink, set against the age of the world, there was hardly a corner of that immense continent, from the tropical north to the freezing south, from the wettest forest to the driest desert, where some band of people did not know every rock and waterhole by name. And feel what they had become, out there in the middle of that country far from any sea, for this is the sweetest turn in the whole story. Go forward a few 1,000 years from the landing, and picture a camp beside a great inland lake, hundreds of miles from any ocean, blue water, reeds, water birds in their clouds, fish, and families living well on the shore of it. Those people are the great-grandchildren, many times over, of mariners. Their ancestors came out of the sea. And they do not know it, and they will never know it, and nobody around that fire has the faintest idea that their family once did the most extraordinary thing any people had ever done. They are simply at home, beside their lake, in their country, which is the only country there has ever been. And when they lose someone they love, they lay her down with enormous care, and they bring ochre, and they burn and gather and bury with a tenderness and a ceremony that speaks of belief and of love, the oldest such farewells anywhere on earth. There they are then, the children of the first seafarers, at home at last, 1,000 miles from any water they cannot see across. Let your breath go slow, and let us go forward now, softly, one last time, and see what became of them across all the long years after. So let us go forward now, gently, and this is the last of it, and it is the part that I find most moving of all. So let it come over you slowly, and let it be the thing you carry down. Because the story does not end. That is the astonishing fact at the bottom of this whole night, and it is a fact, and not a sentiment. Those people who came ashore on that drowned Beach 60, 5,000 years ago, did not vanish. They were not replaced. They did not fade into some later people who came and did it better. They stayed, and their children stayed, and their children's children stayed, in an unbroken line, generation after generation after generation, right down the whole enormous length of time between that beach and this evening, and their descendants are there today. The people of that continent are the direct children of the first seafarers, and they have been in that country continuously since before there was a cave painting in Europe, before there was a farm anywhere on earth, before the last ice age had even properly begun. It is the oldest continuous human story on the planet, and it is not a story about the past. It is still going on. It went on all through today, while you were living your day, and it is going on tonight. And feel the length of that, gently, for our minds are not built for it, and it is worth sitting with. Think of everything that has happened in the world since that landfall, and then understand that every single bit of it happened during that people's tenancy of that land. While they were living there, the great ice came and went. While they were living there, the mammoths came and went. Every cave painting ever painted was painted while they were there. The first farm, the first village, the first city, the first written word, every pyramid, every empire, every religion, every war, every book, every machine, every single thing that any of us thinks of as history, all of it fits, comfortably, with room to spare, inside the time that those families have been sitting around fires in that country, telling their children who they are. We speak of ancient Egypt as unimaginably old. Egypt is a recent event. The people of that continent were already older when the first stone of the first pyramid was cut than the pyramids are now. And here is a thing so lovely that I have saved it for last, and it is the thread that ties the whole night together, and let me be honest and careful with it, because it is debated, and because it matters. Remember the beach they landed on, that great skirt of dry coastal land all around the north of the continent, hundreds of miles wide, where the first fires burned. Remember that when the ice melted, the sea came back and took it, slowly, over thousands of years, a little further up the land in each person's lifetime, drowning the old camps and the old shorelines and the old country, until it was all gone under the shallow warm sea. Now there are stories held by the peoples of that coast, told and retold and handed down, which describe exactly that. Stories of a time when the land ran out much further, when you could walk to islands that are now well offshore, when a particular bay was a grassy plain where people hunted, and of how the water came in and covered it. And a number of scholars who have looked hard at those stories and matched them against what the seafloor and the sea level records actually show, have found them to be accurate, and have argued carefully that these may be true memories handed down by mouth alone for 7,000 or 8,000 years or more. And feel what that would mean if it is so, and hold it gently, because not everyone agrees, and it is very hard to prove, and honest people are still working on it, and it is not the sort of thing that will ever be settled with a single find. But if it is so, then it is the most extraordinary thing in this entire story. It would mean that a memory of the drowning of that first coast, the loss of the very shore their ancestors landed on, was carried in living human voices from parent to child around fire after fire after fire for 300 generations, with no writing of any kind, and arrived intact. It would mean that the beach where the first seafarers came ashore was never actually forgotten at all, that somebody kept it, that the story you and I have been slowly walking through tonight was, in some form, still being told out there all along, by the descendants of the very people who did it, while the rest of the world got on with inventing the alphabet. Whether or not the scholars finally settle it, the thought is worth carrying to sleep, that nothing was lost, that someone remembered, and feel the shape of the whole thing now as we come to rest, the whole long gentle arc of it, from the first shore to tonight. A people who lived at the edge of the world and were content there for ages, a child floating in the warm shallows, a log in a river, some bamboo lashed with vine on a beach by laughing hands, 100 small islands taken one at a time across 100 lifetimes, a grandmother steering by the feel of the swell in the dark, and then one morning a few families carrying their children down to the water and going out past everything they knew, on the strength of a bird's flight and a standing cloud and a piece of driftwood, into an ocean nobody had ever crossed, and finding on the other side of it a whole new world, and making a home in it, and keeping that home unbroken for 65,000 years and keeping it still. That is not a story about exploration. It is a story about families, about people who wanted their children to have a good place to live, and who went to extraordinary lengths, patiently, over unimaginable stretches of time, to give them one. It is the same thing, exactly, that every one of us has ever wanted for the people we love. And so let us leave them, softly, the way we found them, on a warm beach in the evening, with a fire above the tide line. It is some years after the landing now. There are children here who were born on this continent and have never seen any other, and to whom the Great Crossing is only a story the old people tell. The fire is low, the supper is done. The craft that brought them lies up in the dune grass, half taken apart, its good cordage already used for something else, going quietly back to the country. Because nobody is going back, and nobody needs it now. Out on the water the sun is going down over the sea they came across, and none of them are looking at it. They are looking at each other. Somebody is telling something. Somebody laughs. The old woman who steered all that long night is very old now, and she is sitting where the sand is softest, with a great-grandchild asleep against her, and the whole ocean she crossed is out there behind her, and she is not thinking about it at all. She is thinking that the fire wants another piece of wood, and that the child is heavy, and that it has been a good day. There they are then, the first seafarers, at home, at the end of the day, at the beginning of everything. Let your breath go slow, and let the tide come in, and let us stay here with them now, quietly, while you go. And feel your body growing heavier now, and softer, sinking further into the warmth with every slow breath, for there is nothing left tonight that asks anything at all of you. Let your legs lie heavy and still. The legs that carried you through the whole of the day, let them rest now. For there is nowhere left to go tonight, no water to cross, and no shore to walk, nothing but the warm bed and the deepening dark. Let your hands lie open and easy, the hands that did so much. Let them rest now, for there is no paddle to hold, and no cord to lash, and no fire to tend, and all the work of the day is wholly and completely done. Let your jaw soften, and your shoulders come down, and the small muscles around your eyes go smooth and unneeded, and your whole body settle, warm and heavy and content, into the deep soft holding of the night. Let each slow breath out carry you a little further down, a little deeper into the warm dark, the way the swell once lifted and settled under the people sleeping in the bottom of a small boat on a wide and gentle sea. There is nothing to watch for tonight, and nothing to steer by, and nowhere at all you need to be. There is only the warmth, and the dark, and the slow soft breathing, and the long gentle sinking down, and down, towards sleep. For the first seafarers are sleeping now, in your mind's warm eye, the whole close band of them lying down at last on the soft warm sand above the tide line, the children curled safe among the grown-ups, the old ones resting easy in the best places, the paddlers and the makers and the sea-readers all lying down together in the good warm dark, close among their own, with the fire keeping its low red watch, and the great new country lying peaceful and harmless all around them beyond the ring of its light, and the sea they crossed breathing quietly against the sand. They are warm, and they are fed, and they are safe, and they are together, at the end of another good day in the world they went so far to find, and they are letting the day go, and softening, and sinking, exactly as you are, down into the oldest and sweetest rest there is. Let yourself sink with them now. Let the warm dark gather you in as it gathers them. There is no distance between you and them tonight, only the one warm human sleep that has held our whole family safe through every night since the very beginning. The first seafarers and you alike, warm by the fire, at the end of the day, with the water sighing softly somewhere in the dark, drifting down together toward sleep. Sleep now, rest well. You have gone so very far tonight, all the way from a warm green shore at the edge of the known world, out across an ocean nobody had ever crossed, to a beach at the bottom of the earth that no human foot had ever touched, travelling beside the first seafarers, the patient and gentle and quietly astonishing ones, who carried their children out onto open water toward a land they could not see, and found it, and made it home, and whose far children are keeping that home still. Let the warmth hold you, let the fire burn low, let the long night of the world go by outside, harmless and far away, while you lie safe and warm and deeply cared for in the very heart of everything your people learned so very long ago, to make against the dark, the shared fire, the close-kept love, the good home made in an unknown place. There is nothing left to do, and nothing left to hold, and nowhere at all you need to be but here, warm and safe, and among your own, at the end of the day, drifting and nearly gone. And whenever you should find yourself here again, in the quiet, in the dark, in need of a little peace and an old gentle story to carry you down into sleep, the fire at the calm archive will be burning low, and there will always be a place kept warm for you beside it. Good night.